All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on episode 153 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I am one of your co-hosts, Billy Bob. I am streaming from the West Coast, and it's morning for me, 9 a.m. Ian Kummer is streaming from a suburb in Moscow. He's my other co-host, and it is, I'm going to say 7 p.m.
Yes, we're at my 7 p.m.
Right.
local time.
And Carlo Parcelli is our other co-host. He is streaming live from Washington, D.C. It is noon, I believe, at Washington, D.C. at the moment.
Yeah.
And then Leo Zhao is our special guest from East Germany. Is it East Berlin specifically, right, Leo? And is it 6 p.m. where you are? All right. So we were thinking for our broadcast today to talk specifically about some things in lieu of any really major current events that have happened. You know, there hasn't been too much. We're a little bit in a holding pattern. I know that's a debatable statement, and some people might disagree. But nothing really big has been going on, and so one of the things that I've been engaged with this week, and Leo, as we often are, is just talking about China, arguing with people about China, and addressing, Westerners, primarily Westerners, misconceptions or misunderstandings about China. And it seems inevitably those misconceptions are related to their misconceptions about what socialism is, right? So there's just, misconceptions abound in the West. And I think, there's a socialist explanation for that, right? It's like the socialists argue that the bourgeoisie is interested in confusing people and obfuscating the actual issues. And so, they do that with the topic of socialism. They want you to think, socialism is just synonymous with starvation and misery and gulags, and that China, as a, country run by a communist party, is very similar. And so they're authoritarian and they're repressive, and nobody can speak out in China. Like, you have to just toe the line, because if you speak out, you're going to disappear, and everybody knows that. And so when you start saying something good about China, people are like, wait, what? No, China's awful. What are you talking about? So this is the kind of problem that we're confronted with in the West. It's this mass consciousness, this mass, indoctrinated understanding of what China is, what socialism is, that really, needs to be deconstructed and explained. And, we need to offer an alternative perspective, and then let people decide, which one is more reality based. But it is such a very broad, vast, huge topic. It is difficult to know how to approach it, and exactly where to enter into the discussion, because there's so many ways you can go with it. So should I can pose some questions that are often asked about China, or I can open it up to one of you guys if somebody has a particular.
Well, let me just add one thing, preamble to your questions when we tackle the specific issues. The primary reason for the confusion, the intentionally designed confusion, and the complete with atrocity fabrication on the part of big media, the media, industrial, liberal, capitalist, imperialist complex, is to take away options. The only option option for political change, for the direction, for the United States, for Germany, for England, and for Sweden, and all of these countries, to take away the only real option, to take away from the menu, to make people think like that option is bad, that option is not possible, is not workable, and so people are left with this literally no hope in the imperialist core, in the capitalist countries, because the only choice is between one crappy pro-abortion capitalist party and a crappy anti-abortion pro-capitalist party that are both pro-war, of course, pro-war and pro-imperialism and pro-capitalism. So like, just to take away the option, like there are no options, like, because that option, socialism, is gulags and genocides and all of this fake stuff.
I would just add to that the option they want to take away is the one that actually is threatening to their interests, right? They want the one that threatens them, the one they're worried about, the one that has succeeded, in many places, the one that they're currently attacking with their embargoes of Cuba and North Korea. Their soon to be implemented embargo of China, re-implementation of the embargo of China. So all of, they're currently attacking this. So that is the one option that they feel is a serious threat to their current status of, just power, privilege, and they don't want to lose that. And so they're they want everyone to think that one option that it can really affect them is off the table. And they succeed. They succeed in large measure because they dominate and control the education system, the media, and all the talking heads are all anti-socialists. They all are opposed to socialism and want to maintain the status quo.
This is literally the most important, the most crucial, the centrally important thing on their agenda of the ruling class of the West, right? Is that's the number one. The priority is to destroy socialism and to persuade people away from socialism. I mean, that's what the Vietnam War was about. That was what the 1917 invasion of Russia was about. That was what the Cold War was about. All of this. Anyway, sorry.
Agreed. But dissent? Any dissent?
Well, are we talking? I mean, I don't. Well, I'm sorry. Is there an echo when I talk?
There's a nice sound design.
Okay, never mind.
Like a kind of atmospheric industrial ambience.
I don't know what that is. I will mute it.
It's nice. It's not.
But I would distinguish between socialism and communism because a lot of Western countries are, including the USA, have quote unquote socialist aspects. But I think the idea of a communist revolution, they're absolutely opposed to, and that's, fascism is a reaction to communism. I think that's a completely accurate statement. You had this period in the United States itself where you had some major uprisings, and I would say we were actually pretty close to, at least regionally, having communist movements that could be noticed, but they were pretty well. I think the final thing that crushed them was FDR with the New Deal, because he implements the cure, as it turned out, to communism in the United States was socialism. It was
social democracy. Social democracy.
Right. It was a carrot. It was a carrot and a stick. So the carrot was, we are implementing some socialism. We're doing some spending. We're doing some of that scary. It's not direct wealth redistribution, but it's in the form of taxation, wealth redistribution, high tax rates for the rich, and so on. Big public works projects. So there's socialism for you. But communism never happens.
I think the distinction between socialism and social democracy is probably important. I mean, social democracy takes some aspects of socialism, but does not change the ruling class, the class character of the ruling party. So it's not socialism. So social democracy, it's social, it's capitalism with a little bit of social benefits.
No, yeah, I agree with that. And so social democracy is the bane of socialism. And social democracy is an effort by the bourgeoisie to fool the people, get their support, and by offering them carrots, right? So they give them some carrots. They say, "Oh, we're social democracy," but the nature of the ruling class remains the same, and which means that when the people are no longer a threat, when actual genuine socialism is no longer a threat, they can always reverse those social democracy policies. And of course, that's exactly what we saw. I mean, FDR implemented these really good, policies for the working class, and resulted in the golden age of capitalism in the 50s, where, you know, a single household worker could provide healthcare, education, a car, everything. And it was, you know, life was pretty good if you were, you know, middle-class white person. But that could all get rolled back. And of course, once the Soviet Union collapsed, that rolling back effort has really picked up. And so, but no, that was a good, I mean, anything else to add up on that issue, Ian?
Well, it's the 1950s, and well, I mean, it started in the 1950s. It really accelerated by the 1960s and 1970s, and what that was, of course, was the dollar's the reserve currency. So, I mean, the USA is geographically large and geographically blessed. Both in location, having two coastlines, and you know, so much farmland and all of that. But a lot of it was the spending that was made possible by being the world reserve currency, and the rolling back. I mean, no longer competing with the Soviet Union was definitely accelerated that. So I mean, we could. But you know, there were some issues even before that, going off of the gold standard during the Vietnam War, because the country was almost bankrupted by the war. So devaluing its own currency was one of the steps that was taken to prevent that from happening. But what's weird about what's happening now is that you have the MAGA movement, you have conservatives and whatnot who say correctly, hey, you know, standard of living in comparison to the rest of the world was much better. And then you have the other side of that coin saying, no, it was never good. It's normal. We've never been happier. Things have never been better. And you know, it's hard to look around in the USA and say, how could you possibly argue things are better than they were in the 1990s, the 1980s? I mean, it's kind of a denial of reality. Like, you have this decline and everybody's in denial about it. Like, you're crazy if you think there's decline.
One basic metric is to you look at the average. How many hours does the average person have to work to afford their health care, housing, education? And when you look at basic metrics like that, the quality of life has declined considerably, especially since the 50s. But Carlo, please.
I just want to say I was alive in the 50s, and as none of you were, and there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, but it was limited. I mean, I'm from Washington, D.C. At that time, African Americans, where they lived, fronted the alleys in much of the city. They didn't live on the streets. They lived in the alleys, even though a number of them had broken through and had federal employment, which is very important, which is what you're seeing now being largely gutted by Trump and his minions. But for there was also something called white flight. And my family was involved in white flight. They couldn't. That was when white people moved out of the city proper and moved to the suburbs. And my parents could not do that. They did not have the income. Eventually, they put it together with help from relatives. But so I spent a couple of years in the neighborhood that had essentially all turned African American. And so I got to cut my teeth being around African American people all day long, every day, and it was a delight. And I just wanted to. It sort of tore down all the taboos.
Yeah, and you always reference your cousins who maybe didn't have that exposure to people of color that you did, and as a result, they maintained their bigotry, right?
Yeah, I have a lot of cousins, and we could speak
Or maybe it was
Both-
your uncle. Your uncle maybe was the bigot.
Yeah, well, they all were basically on both scions of the family, but in different regards. The people from Massachusetts, they were sort of slick in local politics up there, and they knew how to play the angles. And I don't think in Massachusetts at the time that, and this was not Boston, uh, they 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 had to deal too much with race politics. Now, my relatives in Ohio, much bigger family, they came from coal miners who moved to uh, uh, Ohio from West Virginia, and then to buy a farm, and then realizing they didn't want to do farming. My grandfather and his brother became bootleggers, and that involved them with
People of color.
organized crime out of Cleveland, and so that that got my my great uncle shot in the head, and that persuaded my grandfather to become a drunken sort of farmer. So, but they had that kind of deep rooted, prejudice against blacks. That if blacks got a farm close to them, it was because they were getting favored. Anyway, there's a lot of truth to what you're saying about the 50s, and I just wanted to point that up.
Okay, and I want to refocus us back on the big picture. So we were talking about Western misconceptions of China, and we were noting how those often relate to Western misconceptions about what socialism is. And then Ian brought out that socialism and communism are two different things, which just, and here's what I want to say about all of that is that I don't think there's a correct perspective. It's not, there's many definitions of socialism, many definitions of communism, and to pretend that there's a correct one just kind of misses the reality of what's going on, where we are all human beings looking at the same totality, the same reality, and trying to make sense of it and figure it out. And so there's no right or wrong answer in respect to that, but there are conceptions that make more sense. It makes more sense to see things like this than it makes sense to see things like that. And so that would be the argument that I would make is, it's not that you're right or wrong. If you want to define something in that way, well, that, takes you down a certain path. And I mean, we can talk about that path, but there's other paths and other perceptions and other angles with which you can understand these things.
There are also definitions. Some definitions are more useful than others.
Yes.
Right. I mean, they're not wrong. You can define, what anything.
Yeah. Let's define capitalism as something that has never existed and that is conceptually impossible. Does that help? You stupid idiots. I mean, because I deal with that all the time. No, capitalism is when you have a totally free market. That's what capitalism is. Capitalism is what isn't what always has existed.
Yeah, so, what they're describing is actually also communism. Total free market with like total fucking free market. Do anything you want.
End stage communism after the
state has communism. You can have sex with anyone you want. You can eat like snort anything. You don't have to work if you don't want to work. You can go meditate all day every day. You can go play video games all day every day.
So I mean, I think that I don't know. I would say that you're at that point you're going to need a police force because you're going to get a lot of people abusing their freedom and thinking that they have their freedom is going to corrupt them. And they're going to, help themselves to other people, or
but we keep thinking of like total freedom. We keep imagining total freedom in the context of bourgeois society, right? Where communities are atomized. There's no community. There's no empathy. There's no trust. There's no love between the people, right? We keep imagining total freedom in that context, but end stage communism is a totally different social reality where communities thrive and there is so much integration and closely knit community that total freedom in that context is totally different. It's not.
Yeah, and you've had
probably doesn't need to be
generations.
controlled by the
You've
police.
had generations and generations and generations of unlearning the current thing, and so in a way, it's hard to even imagine. But we're conceptualizing what could be possible, without these constraints and without the unnecessary scarcity and exploitation that exists under capitalism. After generations and generations of moving away from that and towards something else, people's consciousness will evolve, and so it's possible that you will not need the kinds of police force to keep people in line, because people will have evolved to a better understanding and a better evolution, really. But yeah, so there's very little. To me, there's very little utility in describing how things could be in 100, 200, 300 years after all these material changes have taken place. It's like, what is the point of that? I don't want to really spend a lot of time on that.
Sure.
And yet, a lot of people do. They imagine, well, how do we know that China's ever going to abolish their state? It's like, and they ask that question, and that and they think that is a logical way to think that how can we support China. They're not that different from, they have capitalism. They're not that different from, how the West operates. And how are we going to know they're ever going to abolish their state and blah, 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 blah. But I think when they ask those questions, I think it just demonstrates a lack of understanding, or it definitely demonstrates a lack of understanding of our, perspective. But, okay, let me open it back up.
Maybe we could elaborate on that, because the Chinese system and several of the other ongoing communist systems that are in existence right now are different than the Soviet Union, right? So what is China and Vietnam, and I guess Cambodia? I think Cambodia is kind of funny because Americans forget Cambodia exists.
Well, Laos too.
Laos is, I guess, communist, but they're not officially communist. So they do have a communist party. I'm not sure about Laos.
I think they're led by a communist party.
Yeah, they're
They
communist.
do have a communist party, but it's not a communist regime, if that makes sense. They have a communist party, but they're not a communist.
No, that's interesting. I'm not sure. I haven't heard that before. I always just thought they were the same as Vietnam, Cambodia, and but
I don't know. I don't know for a fact. So what? So Vietnam and China, of course, have their growth success stories. Cuba does not, but Cuba is also under the heaviest embargo. North Korea, same with North Korea, biggest heavy embargo. So countries without that embargo have big success stories. So I guess the question that a lot of Western people ask is, what did China and Vietnam do differently? Did they move away from communism? Did they adapt a different form of communism? Because there is some market economy going on there. So I guess the question that people ask a lot is, well, is it real communism? And if so, how did they adapt it? So
instead of lecturing for the next half hour, I'm going to invite Leo to
yes.
Yeah, first of all, the word communism, when applied to socialist states like China, means that is their official ideology. It does not mean that the country is actually communist. China is a socialist country according to Lenin's conception of socialism, which is state capitalism, very literally, under a dictatorship of the proletariat. So it is state capitalism under a working class state, under a communist party which adheres to the principles of communism, or with the end goal of communism in mind, in how to develop the country. So that's what China is. China is a socialist country. China is a partly it has a partly capitalist economy and partly state-run economy. And the important thing is that the bourgeoisie, which exist in China, which live in China, do not control the state. That's the crucial difference.
And I want to talk about, how do we define socialism? I mean, what is socialism? How is it different from communism? To me, socialism is it okay? So there's two aspects, right? Because it's called political economy, and I always argue you cannot detach and see in isolation economy from the political side, right? So it's the political economy. There are two things. Now, one definition of socialism tries to do that. So there's a definition of socialism that says socialism is the public ownership of the means of production. It is the abolition of private ownership. And so that is socialism. And I would argue that is one definition, and it's a helpful definition, but it ignores the political side of things. It focuses only on the economy and ignores the political side. Socialism is also when you have a party that is representative of the working class instead of a party that is representative of the ownership class. So capitalism is when the ownership class runs the state. Socialism is when the working class runs the state. So you have two aspects of socialism, the economic and the political. And in the West, people kind of don't even think in those terms, right? They just assume that, we have a representative government in the US and they have a dictatorship in these socialist countries. And so they don't understand that the state, as well as individual industries, can be controlled by one of the two classes, either the ownership class or the working class. And so you have to have both. So socialism, I would say first and foremost, is when a party, a socialist party or communist party that represents the working class is in power. And then they're not necessarily going to abolish all private ownership. What they're going to do is they're going to identify the best interest of the working class within the current material conditions that exist, and they're going to pursue those interests. And sometimes pursuing those interests means harnessing and tolerating a measure of private ownership. And so, but it's, is that convoluted? Did anybody follow me? Does anybody understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. No. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think a lot of Westerners are so indoctrinated, they might have just not even heard me.
Yeah, the abolition of private property, the abolition of for-profit property. That's the end goal. I mean, how can anyone think that this can be done overnight? How can anyone? I mean, the global economy runs on the logic of private ownership, for-profit ownership, right? I mean, it's an entire global economy that runs on that logic. How are you going to, for one country, to abolish private ownership, for-profit ownership of private enterprise, corporations, privately owned corporations? How are you going to do that? Like that, this system today took 300 years to build the modern capitalism.
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to just how can you expect China or the Soviet Union or Cuba, especially when imperialism is still breathing down our necks with sanctions and embargoes, economic violence, and constant threat of military violence, and diplomatic isolation, propaganda war. Like how, especially under these conditions, how can any country abolish the commodity form? Western Marxists are the worst. Western academic Marxists, they will bring out all the jargon. Well, what about the commodity production? What about the
wage labor?
Yeah, wage labor, symbolic value. What about symbolic value? If it's not if you have all of these things, you're not socialist.
Right. And so what would happen? Like, what has made China strong? China has been made strong, and they've had the highest efficiency, in the history of the known universe in improving quality of lives, improving living standards, because they have had access to direct foreign investment. So Westerners have been able to move money over there, which they have in the trillions, right, to directly invest in China. that has helped them. And if they were to have never allowed private ownership, they would have missed out on this trillions of direct foreign investment. Not to mention being able to export to Western markets. The Western markets would have never opened themselves to China if China maintained, the abolition of private ownership. And so there was a tactic, the Communist Party of China engaged in this tactic of reform and allowing, a measure of private ownership under the control of the Communist Party within the law to benefit their country. And it has worked tremendously. And it is only when it has stopped helping them will they go away from that, right? And that's how the material conditions dictate your policies, as opposed to a rigid, dogmatic pursuit of some pure socialism, which is just fucking stupid. I mean,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
It comes down to people who have no idea what development means. It comes down to people who don't have a physical understanding of underdevelopment, and so therefore they don't understand development. Like the plumbing system in New York City and in London was largely paid for with opium profits, as well as slavery profits, as well as gold profits from the Ivory Coast, ivory from the Ivory Coast, gold profits from the Gold Coast. People who grew up with streets already paved, they don't understand underdevelopment. I mean, China had to develop, and you need capital to develop. You need large sum of money that you can invest and do public projects like building plumbing and building electrical grid and things like this. I was talking to an African young filmmaker who was educated in France, in Paris. Not surprisingly, her views are, we don't need China. Africans will do it ourselves. Africa we should do it ourselves. Anybody else comes into Africa is going to rape us, is going to exploit us and colonize us. And China is doing the same thing. We don't need China. We can do it ourselves. That's
what a
just
French education will get you. Yeah,
that's what a French education does to a motherfucker. Sorry for my language. As if it would just happen without money, without capital, without trade, without technology transfer. These countries that are very advanced, as if you can just.
And I have no doubt that Africa over, decades and generations could improve, of course. But China can help tremendously. China can facilitate that.
Of course. And China had no help. China had no sympathetic country to help it after the defeat of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the collapse of the the socialist bloc all around Europe. And, China had no one to help. So they had to trade with the West, and they had to pretend for a while to be we're on our way to liberal democracy. We're going to become a liberal democracy. We're going to become a, social democracy, maybe. So trade with us, invest in our enterprises, for which private ownership is necessary, because what the IMF, the big banks of the US, is not going to lend to the Communist Party of China. They're going to lend to privately owned corporations.
Yeah, and no Western investors are going to invest if they can't have ownership of what they're investing in. For so many reasons, that was the correct decision to make. But you touched on something that is important, and it's basically about China's overall approach to the American-led rules-based order, right? And so China, was weak, right? They didn't have the power that they have now, even 20 years ago. They were a fraction of their economy even 20 years ago, and so they saw in their best interest to ingratiate themselves into the U.S.-led global economy, and they weren't going to be like the U.S. They weren't going to they weren't going to get political. Any government that the United Nations said was legitimate, they would trade with. and they weren't going to, use trade as a weapon to politicize it like the U.S. does. And so far, they haven't done that. But this results in Westerners attacking China for supporting, the occupation of Palestine, which is, one allegation that I was,
that they still trade with Israel.
Right, exactly. They trade with Israel. They trade with Saudi Arabia. Now, my response to that is, well, trading with Israel is nowhere as bad as trading with the United States. If you're going to be angry at China for trading with a bad country, you should be really angry at China for trading with the United States, because no country is as evil and bad as the United States. Their puppets are just, weak puppets compared to the strength and evilness of the United States. But people, these people that are, arguing these things, they don't have that conception, right? They think, oh, Israel's the evil one, Saudi Arabia is evil, and China therefore is evil for trading with them. But it's just a misconception of China's approach to, the world system that continues to be dominated by the West and the United States. And so it's a long process of overcoming this Western domination of the planet and slowly displacing Western domination. And so, China at some point, I think, will be under attack. And that's when they're going to have no choice but to reconsider, their approach to the global economy. Because right now it's, hey, we're, World Trade Organization rules. We're going to trade with everybody. We will not violate, World Trade Organization rules by sanctioning people or by tariffing people, and et cetera, due to their political, ideology. Anyway, does that go ahead, Carlo?
It's just, in short, they won't weaponize like the Western, like Europe and America. They won't weaponize their economies.
Yeah, if countries are willing to trade with them, they are happy to trade with those countries. But when a country weaponizes trade against them, of course they're going to reciprocate, but they're not going to initiate.
Right.
And so they have a non-escalatory approach. So China doesn't want to escalate. They don't want to rock the boat. They're doing great. Time is on their side. They're winning. And so they have no interest in escalating a conflict with the West by sanctioning, Western puppets or the West itself.
The fundamental thing about sanctions is the reason for China's position on sanctions is that sanctions only hurt ordinary people whenever they're applied. And this is a very cruel, extremely cruel political weapon that the imperialist countries engage in. And sanctions hurt only ordinary people, and China trades with all countries because ordinary people in Israel are good. Ordinary people, I mean, the ones that have not been completely brainwashed by fascism. There was just a 17% of them. Maybe a minority these days. Very sad. But there are student protests in Israel. Of course, there are protests against the genocide, against Zionism in Israel all the time. I mean, ordinary people, even the ones that are brainwashed. I mean, they're brainwashed. They're not evil incarnate. They're like, I mean, given a chance, like inshallah, they can be re-brainwashed or like unbrainwashed. They can be rejuvenated with a correct ideology and conception of themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's always hope. I mean, the communist view is that there's always hope. Human beings are basically good. Human beings are capable of reason. Human beings want to share some food with each other, a laugh, and they want to trade with each other, and they want to dance and make art and make music, and this is what primarily human beings want to do. So this is the underlying philosophical foundation of socialism, and so everything proceeds from that point on. And so no sanctions, no sanctioning civilian populations of anywhere.
So I have a question now. So I think it's a big step to advocate to Western audiences that a country existing isn't a threat to your way of life. You don't have to use sanctions and invasions. It's just you don't have to adhere to Wolfowitz doctrine. Just a country that's being strong and existing isn't a threat to you. It's a big step, but when it comes to, like you mentioned, Leo, you mentioned your African friend. So I think that poses a good question for the panel here. So if you have a person like your friend from Africa, or say a person from New Jersey, or anywhere else in the world, what is the sales pitch for China? Why should these people not just be indifferent to China? Oh, China's okay. I think that's the default position to a person who's not propagandized by the voice of America. Oh, China's evil, China's bad. But what's the opposite? But the opposite position, that China's good, that China's a good influence, everyone should get behind. What's the sales pitch?
Okay. First of all, I think sales pitch is not so important to the Chinese Communist Party, to the Communist Party.
Maybe not
China,
sales pitch. Maybe that's the
for us. Yeah, sure, to convince people. I mean, I really think the Communist Party of China doesn't prioritize convincing people on a debate kind of level, but for us, absolutely, it's important. I would say China provides an example of how you in your country can build a majoritarian government. And it's an example, it shows the world what a majoritarian government can do, what it does, both domestically and foreign policy, and in terms of foreign engagement. I would say this is the value. This is and I mean, come on, like 70% of renewable energy is built in China. Like, it's literally the hope of humanity. I mean, not the country. It just happens to be so big, and it just happens to have a socialist government. But socialism is the only hope for humanity. Like, look at all these, everything that's fucked up, right? China shows the world another way of engagement, like, in every way, domestically, foreign. Like we said, no sanctions, no interference, diplomacy, build bridges, build friendships, build trade, build solidarity with the global South, with the countries not ruled by minoritarian psychopaths, right? So it's a whole other way of existing. I mean, it's not only socialism. There is some Chinese civilization in there as well. But I think China's most important thing is that it shows people how their country can have socialism with Danish characteristics, with New York, with U.S. characteristics, with Nigerian characteristics.
Yeah, and so you're using words like majoritarian, and I mean, I want to just get back to ideological, basic Marxist-Leninist terms. And so, China demonstrates what a proletarian dictatorship, what a government that is genuinely interested in furthering the interests of the working class majority can do if they're allowed. Because all the West knows about democracy and about the state is a minority rule bourgeois dictatorship. That is the only state they've ever known. And so they kind of project that understanding onto other societies where it's totally different. And there is a difference between a proletarian dictatorship and a bourgeois dictatorship. A bourgeois dictatorship identifies and pursues the interests of the ownership class, and a proletarian dictatorship identifies and pursues the interests of the working class. And so thank God for China, because they show what is possible if that society is able to put in place a proletarian dictatorship to overcome, the bourgeois dictatorship, and just get a government that actually represents them, the majority, the working class. When you do that, man, tremendous things are possible. And yeah, China is the proof of that, as is, Vietnam to a lesser extent. And of course, people want to say, well, look at North Korea. But again, look at the material conditions faced by North Korea compared to the material conditions faced by China. So North Korea struggled because of the embargo and the relentless, policies against them. Carla, go ahead.
And North Korea and the geography, they have less arable land. They don't have the kind of arable land the South has. But I just wanted to add that this is too much to ask of the average American. But just look at the history of what's transpired in the short time that the Bricks and Road Initiative has been in effect, and the U.S. is the imperial capital brotherhood. What's happened? You have Haiti. You want to look at a bad example. Here's a country that's being punished because of a revolution led by black people in the early 19th century. I could take a microphone out of the streets of Washington D.C. to some of the most expensive restaurants people having lunch and ask them, when did Haiti finish paying back its debt to France that was levied by the powerful Western powers at the time? They didn't finish paying it back until just a couple of decades ago. It took them hundreds of years, and they paid it back. You look at Nicaragua. When the Sandinistas took power under Carter, he got a report from the World Health Organization that said the Sandinistas were doing so well. Education, healthcare, you name it, quality of life. And they were paying back at a certain point the $300 million in debt that the Somozas had brought upon the country, which they stole, of course, along with their U.S. confreres, mostly in Miami, and it was destitute. Now it's a viable country, even though the U.S. once again, like Cuba, has its foot on its neck. Look at Cuba; they just did the new report on Cuban quality of life in every category, from life expectancy to infant mortality. Cuba is ahead of the U.S. U.S. under those conditions that they try to operate. You can't. That's what I would try to get people to do, and they won't do it, of course. And
instead of
that,
understanding the context of what happened in Cuba, how great Cuba is doing despite this embargo. And we got to remember, this embargo is a global embargo. Like, the U.S. levies the law, and they have these extraterritorial sanctions. And they say, if you're a corporation or a government doing business with Cuba, you can't do business with the United States. So everybody is forced to choose, which market do you want to access, the Cuban market or the U.S. market? And due to the U.S.'s huge economy, of course, everybody is going to side with the United States, and that's how these sanctions have cost hundreds of billions of dollars to the people of Cuba, and still their infant mortality is lower, their life expectancy is longer. Like, this is a success so the idiots that say Cuba proves that socialism doesn't work, they're just mindless. Go ahead, Carla.
So I just want to give one example of the way the U.S. media handles Cuba and the Dominican Republic in this case. The other side of the island of Hispaniola with Haiti. That's the Dominican Republic. I like baseball, and I watch things on baseball, right? The way they handle Cuban baseball is that, look at all this money that the Cuban government wastes on beautiful baseball fields and stadiums and equipped kids and equipping all the way down and looking for talent and and all of that. Then they go to Haiti. And they go, Haiti. Not Haiti. The Dominican Republic. They go, look at the Dominican. These kids, they're so poor. They have to take empty milk cartons and make gloves out of them. That's how poor they are. There are no fields for them to play on, except the kind of rocky fields you would expect of people make available for themselves. And they don't see the sense of irony in what they're doing. and then you can flip the Ukraine and you go, look, I would be a lot more fervent against the crap that the shit that the Trump administration and Trump himself is, and he's literally shitting himself now. But except for the fact that you cannot get one fucking asshole who was in the Biden camp or whatever you want to talk honestly in the media in the media about the true chronology of the war in Ukraine, the coup of Maidan 2014, the peace talks that occurred, the bombing of the Donbass that had gone on since 2014 and earlier, which had taken 14,000 lives. You can't get them to make that one flip so they can be that at least on that level consistent, a little consistent in their own thinking. That's really worked, and it's discouraging. It's very discouraging.
I would like to get maybe back onto the topic because we brought up, the question of why support China, and Leo brought up the majorityist rule. I think that's significant because the democratic countries, or as they call themselves, the democratic world, the free world. It's kind of amazing that almost every major country in that bloc has approval ratings, not just below 50%, but far below. Like Trump is actually like one of the most popular Western leaders. It's not because he's particularly popular, but because the other ones are more hated than him. Like Macron is like 25%. Britain is going through prime ministers more often than some people change their underwear lately. I mean, it's amazing. But so I think that's a true statement that China, other countries can look in China and say, well, that's a good example. We could be like China. We could have that triple or even 4-digit growth from going from underdeveloped, no paved roads, no toilets, nothing, to being an industrialized country. That can definitely be replicated, but it's not quite. Because this show advocates for not just liking China and saying, "Well, we could be like China." It's actually advocating for China. So I think that needs some explanation, for for that. Not just for me, but even just because you have people watching you. We've got our guys, our hundreds of viewers watching this show right now. So for them, why should they not just like China and say, China's a cool country, we could be like China, but actually agreeing with the Chinese position, if you will, if I'm explaining that.
You want to try, Leo? Because I could spend the next 45 minutes monologuing, but I'll defer to you, sir.
Wait, sorry. You mean how to appeal to people on an emotional level, or what exactly?
Well, not just as an argument. You're at a bar arguing with somebody, right? What is this person saying? Why? Okay, well, China's cool, but why should I care about China? I'd even phrase it that way. Why should I care about China?
And you can defer to me, Leo, if you want, because believe me, I have
because I think there is I think we don't really address that properly on this show. So you can say, well, there's countries like Cuba, Russia, China, Vietnam, Chad. These countries are cool and they have their own thing. But when you have this binary choice, if you have this Western system, this rules-based order, which they call themselves, we're the rules-based world order. So what should convince a person to get out of bed, to stop doom scrolling and say, well, you know what, I like the alternative. So what makes China the alternative to the rules-based world order? Maybe that's the best way to phrase it.
Well, there's plenty of arguments on doom scrolling. I mean, these days there's a lot of content out of China that is just mind-blowing, right? There's a lot of TikTok videos of the cities, of the flying taxis. I mean, flying taxi companies are in business, are operational. You can call an Uber, or maybe not an Uber, a self-driving Uber, and a helicopter, a tiny little helicopter comes to pick you up. That's literally operational. But why should people care about China? Because there's so many things. China is almost single-handedly reshaping global trade. China is bypassing the chokeholds that set up by colonialism of global trade routes that have been operational for thousands of years, restoring that, bypassing the choke points. Right? China is literally changing the world. Like desertification, right? Like massive. China is basically on its way to get rid of all its deserts, like making all of its deserts into green forests. And helping investing in African green energy and solar energy to turn the Sahel into a massive energy boost. The massive deserts in the Sahel regions, to turn it in. In terms of climate and pollution, China builds some coal plants, yes, but that's only temporary, and it's only for building renewable, sustainable, renewable energy. You want to say something about that, Carlo?
I just want to say that they have the only the only operating thorium plant in the world.
Yeah. And thorium is a major step towards, of course, fusion energy, which is coming. Which is, people in the field say 5-10 years. We're talking about endlessly renewable, clean, free, literally like costless, no cost energy. That will change the fucking world. There's a Marxist argument that it was the steamship, it was steam engine that ended slavery. You always need to advance to a higher energy production source in order to liberate in order for past forms to become also obsolete. And there is some truth to that. Marx famously said that it is new means. Like liberation does not happen because of changing people's ideas. Liberation happens by changing the material conditions, by changing real means, real things happening in the world. And so, thorium is hugely exciting. It produces like what? A year's worth of energy for the globe in like 72 hours or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very promising. Obviously we're at the very beginning stage. We haven't developed it yet, but yeah, we're taking those steps, and China, of course, is leading the way. But what we're talking about, what we're describing here, is just two different perspectives and approaches and ideologies to the planet, to humanity. And so China is advocating for peace, mutual prosperity, the development of the underdeveloped world, exactly how they have managed to accomplish for themselves. They want to export, to Central and South America, Africa, and other Asian countries. Now, what is the opposition to that? The opposition to that is Western imperialism and a Western ruling elite who are interested in maintaining, first and foremost, their own wealth, power, and privilege. And so China's efforts to develop the planet and engage in win-win trade and peace through mutual prosperity is a threat to Western hegemony and Western imperialism. And when I talk about Western, I'm not talking about the Western people. I'm talking about the ownership class, the ruling class, the elites. Those are the people who see what China is doing as a threat. So people really have two choices. It's a binary. Are you going to support the Western ruling class elites and their efforts to keep the developing world exploitable, and so that we can keep them, mired in poverty and misery, and exploit them and extract all the wealth from them for the benefit of the elites? Or are we interested in seeing a world that China is pushing towards, where it's developing the underdeveloped world and peace through mutual prosperity? So these are the two options, and I just don't understand how anybody can think in nationalistic terms. So when Ian first posed the question came out different to me a few times. And one of the ways he posed it was, how can Americans like actually, identify with China and promote China? I mean, it's one thing to like them, but how can you promote them and what they're doing? And I would just say, because I'm not a nationalist, I'm not a racist, I don't see things in terms of, I want what's good for the people within this geographic borders, these imaginary arbitrary borders that have resulted from, thousands of years of existence and slavery and genocide. Like, I don't care just about the people in these imaginary borders, right? I care about humanity. I care about the planet, progressing the planet in a sustainable way that benefits all of humanity, not just, people within these borders. But nationalism is a lie, because nationalism gets people to think, to ignore the class distinction, right? And within any nation, there's going to be two classes under capitalism. And it's the bourgeoisie, it's the ownership class that want to promote nationalism to convince, the working class to support their, their exploitative policies or their aggressive policies. And so I would just say that the reason I can support China is because their vision is a vision for humanity, a vision for the planet, and a vision for uplifting all of humanity, instead of some nationalist bullshit that is really not even for the nation, but it's for a class within the nation to maintain their wealth, power, and privilege. That's what capitalism is. This is the binary that makes the most sense.
Well, I guess because here's I guess the conundrum here, because a trade partner is very good and there is mutual prosperity with a trade partner, but a trade partner and a friend or an ally even aren't the same thing. Yeah, I mean, do you see what I'm saying here? Because what this show is asking, that China is your friend, China is your ally. The problem is, if you look at it, from the Marxist perspective, China's not the Soviet Union, or not. I think even the Soviet Union wasn't the Soviet Union after Lenin. They stopped trying to fuel this class struggle across the world. I mean, they still did in Africa and Vietnam, but they stopped this, world revolution to some extent. But China's not doing it. So if we're saying, well, you should like China because they're going to help you with, the global revolution, I don't see China doing that. They're not sitting there saying, well, we're going to help Americans have their own communist revolution. I don't see them doing that. And
I'm not sure. Okay, that's a weird one, because nobody anywhere has said that we support China because they're helping to export a global revolution.
Well, I mean, so what is? Saying China is a trade partner. And I think everyone can agree with that.
Hey, have you read Stalin when he is confronted with this idea of global revolution? He called it comical. He said it's a comical, and then he said it's a tragic comical assertion that the Soviet Union or communism itself was. I mean, Trotsky.
Right, like I said, with Lenin, at the end of Lenin, it was the end of exporting revolution. So what?
No,
so I guess my point is,
I would argue that Lenin was not for exporting the global revolution. I mean, Lenin was trying to, he wanted peace, and so and to allow the Soviet Union to develop in socialist ways. Now, and they weren't interested in sending troops to Germany to help Rosa Luxemburg. I mean, Stalin explains this clearly. But this idea that communism is about exporting global revolution, I think, is a Western canard, and it's something pushed by the bourgeoisie. This idea of communism as doing that, and I think it's false.
I guess. So supporting China, what does China give in return? Because there does need to be an exchange. There does need to be an exchange. I mean, it's thermodynamics. There does need to be an exchange. It can't be a one-way relationship. So we're advocating.
Well, when I say win-win trade, I mean that's what win-win trade is. And so right now, I mean, so the current relationship between the United States and China is a great example. I mean, the United States benefits from China as the manufacturer, allowing, commodities a lot less expensively than they would otherwise be. Now, I mean, there's obviously problems with a lot of jobs going over there, but you can't blame China for that. That's going to be the fault of the bourgeoisie, who has, enriched themselves tremendously from exploiting Chinese labor and Chinese education system, etc.
Well, let's compare it to so like because I live in Russia, so I'll bring up Russia as an example. Maybe help. So if you talk to people in Africa, I mean, there are of course the trolls, the African trolls who praise NATO and say Russia is evil, China is evil, blah blah blah. But for the most part, it seems like there's a overwhelmingly positive. I don't know about China because I don't ask about China, but with Russia, it's kind of weird seeing all these, African people with Russian flags. It's kind of like surreal. You're like, what? Not what you expect. I like Pushkin, Yuri Gagarin's first man in space. Well, I mean, it's not accidental because, there is both financial export. I mean, there is financial assistance, but it's not just financial assistance. There's cultural exports. I think it is important to Russians. Even just their mentality is important. Cultural exports important.
Military as well. Let's not forget the massive military.
Russians will go to Africa.
Assistance that the Russian military, as well as the Prigozhin.
Because Russians are very interested in other cultures.
Have helped African countries Wagner fight off Boko Haram and
the Western proxies.
Al-Nusra, like the Western-backed Islamists. Anyway, go on.
All right. Is there so do you get what I'm getting? Is are Chinese people going and being like Wagner? Are they participating in these wars? Are they going as
maybe few?
What's the word? Ethnography is very big in Russia. They're very big on, going to these faraway countries and studying the language, studying the culture. So you can see it's not accidental that you have these very far away kind of obscure places that are really gung ho about Russia because it's because Russians went there. That's why they like Russia.
In the Central African Republic, there are not one but two statues, bronze statues erected to commemorate Wagner, specifically the Wagner group. Two like pretty big bronze monuments.
So I'm just looking up Google, and it says, basically an AI-generated explanation is, while both Russia and China are increasing their influence in Africa, China is the dominant economic player, while Russia focuses on military partnerships and arms sales. So they're not doing the same things in Africa, but it's complementary. It's like Russia is providing the security, and China is the dominant investor, over $200 billion annually. So it's complementary, and I'm all for it. Carlo?
Because the Soviet Union was famous for aiding revolutionary groups in Africa during its tenure, and
educating Africans as well.
Yes, the whole 100 yards. Also providing healthcare, that sort of thing, but also weapons and training whenever needed. Whenever the assault needed, and now you have China picking up the role of development, and I go back to my Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso triumvirate, but it's now taken over other countries, Namibia, which is now. Other countries are starting to enter the BRICS sphere, obviously.
Anyway. There has been to date 20 some assassination attempts on Ibrahim Traore. All of them thwarted with the help of Russian intelligence.
There we go. Yeah.
So
it's a constant struggle, and the United States has such vast resources. The West has such vast resources, and there's it's easy to buy off people in Africa to do things that are against the interests of the continent and in the interest of the West. And so it's a constant struggle that has to be dealt with and overcome. And thankfully, Russia and China are both aligned in their efforts to free the continent of Africa from Western colonial domination. And it's something that we need to support, but it is a struggle because The West is still powerful. They're still strong. And there's, the people are so poor that it's easy to, buy off groups and to get groups of people to do bad things, for money. And the sooner we can develop Africa and offer opportunities other than that to people, like that's gonna, be less and less of a problem as the continent continues to develop, and provide opportunities to the people. But
just a word on another word to continue with the earlier thing of Afro libs, African liberals that are educated in the West, or have, even worse if they have some kind of institutional position in academia. But it's nothing more sad than what I see from African liberals. This absolute, just like, I have one good friend of mine. She's also a DJ, and she's from Kampala, from Uganda. She's very smart, good person, good friend. But she just says, Ibrahim Traore is fake, and he is a puppet of Russia, and Russia, China are going to colonize Africa, and all this propaganda about Ibrahim Traore, about Mali, Niger, like it's all fake. They just want to empower themselves. They want to make money for their friends, and they're the puppets of Russia. Like, it's so sad to hear this stuff. We can understand, right, that people in Africa have been disappointed over and over and over by the promise of change, of decolonization, and time. Again, we have seen corruption creep in. The ANC, Nelson Mandela's party, became a giant corrupt, like, dunghill, shithill. So we of course we understand, like, why people just, like, emotionally don't want to give themselves up to hope, right? To be fooled again. That's the feeling. Like, I'm too smart to fall for another liberation, like, campaign that's hailing. But it's very, very sad. Yeah. So that combined with all the liberal propaganda.
I think I think that's why Traore has moved so quickly to improve the lives of the people in Burkina Faso. Maybe it's time to get around the central question we talked about before we began the show, and that was the article in the New York Times that claimed that China did not want to see the war in Ukraine end because it took away from it prevented the U.S. from concentrating its military attention toward China. How do you guys feel about that?
There may be an element of that. Geostrategically speaking, sure. There's probably a few strategic thinkers in China who are like, yeah, this is actually, not terrible for us. It's better than if they, actually are able to pivot to us. There's certain element of, war is war, opportunities or, like, advantages come in all kinds of random, like, shapes. And I don't think China is doing anything to continue these wars. I think that's the idiocy, the pure fucking imbecility of the West is doing that itself by doing again going for a forever war in the Middle East, in West Asia, with Iran. Yeah. Sufficiently tying themselves up.
But these articles, they want to blame China, right? They want to suggest it's China's fault that there's a genocide in Gaza. Like, China could put a stop to that, but they just refuse. And they could put a stop to the war in Ukraine, and they refuse. And this is just, it's not true, and it's bullshit. And it allows the United States and the West, who is responsible, it gives them a pass. Like, it excuses them, and it pretends that the U.S. doesn't have the total agency in the war in Ukraine, in the genocide in Gaza, and it's just disgusting. And liberals ought to fucking know better than to suggest it's China's fault that that China hasn't stopped the genocide in Gaza and China hasn't stopped the war in Ukraine. Ian, you had some thoughts.
Well, when it comes because what we're talking, it seems like most of, because it's strange because Billy Bobby said, you're against nationalism, but it seems like all of these problems we've listed here so far could be solved by more nationalist self-awareness because French people, if Americans, if British people said, hey, why are we in Britain's case is literal, why did we slash pensioners benefits so we could send more weapons to Ukraine? Why are we sending weapons to Israel so they can have free healthcare and free education while we don't, while bombing the hell out of basically all of their neighbors? If everybody, because I think it's actually a true statement. If everybody right now was just like, what, from this day forward, I'm done with altruistic motives. I'm just going to do what's good for my particular nation. Well, that's not a perfect motive. It's a selfish motive. It's pure self-interest. But
No,
at the
there's
same
nothing
time,
wrong with that. Of course.
you wouldn't have NATO. You wouldn't have sending billions.
Yes. You're absolutely correct. Self-interest is good. Everyone should be interested in themselves. Everyone should, and you eventually you're so interested in yourself that you realize that what's good for your neighbor is also good for you, because if your neighbor likes you, he's going to bring over cupcakes.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
If your neighbor hates you, he's going to come piss on your bushes.
Take a dump in your pool.
So self-interest, if we go deep enough, becomes like humanity interest. But with the self-interest of nationalism that you're talking about, the class question is central, because like Billy Bob was saying earlier, what is taken as nationalism today is actually not authentic nationalism. It is the bourgeoisie. It is interests of the bourgeoisie that is being touted as national interests.
Yeah. So the bourgeoisie is interested in having a global military empire with, military bases in over 25 of the world's 200 countries. Is that in the interest of the working class to pay for that, to fund that? I would say no. And so, exactly what Leo was saying, the media promotes this national interest, but really the national interest is nothing of the sort. It's the interest of the ruling ownership class and their, hegemonic interests, and they're wanting to maintain their own obscenely disproportionate share of wealth, power, and privilege. That's, what they consider nationalism, and it's bullshit. And so, nationalism, I'm for nationalism, a rational nationalism, every country understanding that peace and mutual prosperity is appropriate. And we're not going to let religious or racial differences or cultural differences, get in the way of promoting, a forward plan of, unity and peace. But
the kind of nationalism that gets trotted out exacerbates racism, or it feeds on racism. Like nationalism means against foreigners, means foreign indentured work, or not indentured workers, migrant labor becomes a threat. Like what? Or trading with other countries becomes a threat. Like that's fake nationalism. That's the stupid nationalism. Anyway.
Yeah, there's so many things they can weaponize to divide the working class, and as long as we're not divided, we're not coming up against their agenda. But they don't just want to divide us; they want to get us on board with their agenda, and so it's just really divisive. And they control the media, and through the media is how they rot people's minds and confuse them. And I think we just need to. Again, the fundamental aspect is the oppositional class interest, and that the ownership class minority has different political and economic interests than do the working class. And so that's what socialism is about. Socialism is about putting in power a party that understands that and is genuinely interested in promoting the interests, political and economic interests of the working class majority. And this is often done against the interests of the wealthy elite. They have different interests. They want different things. And so not only are you coming up against that, but you're coming up against each society has completely different material conditions that they have to navigate. And so there's no dogmatic approach to pursuing the interest of the working class. And that's what socialism is. And it's not just an end goal, but it's also the efforts to navigate the material conditions in the process of achieving that end goal. So socialism is it's a process. It's an idea. It's an understanding of reality based on oppositional class interests. And it's a lot of things that I think Westerners just don't understand, because to them, it's simply the dogmatic abolition of private ownership. And that's just stupid. You're just dumb if you're going to limit your conception and your understanding to that. And you're going to attack China for not being socialist because they have made the smart decision to harness private ownership, in pursuit of a broader agenda, a broader vision, a good agenda, a good vision for humanity. All right. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, it does. Have the rest of you watched the Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz interview that came out?
Oh no.
Yes.
I saw Tucker interviewed by that German guy, but I only saw clips.
Yes. So it's worth watching, because I think that was deliberate. I think Ted Cruz was meant to be the globalist establishment mouthpiece. So to come on Tucker Carlson shows and convince Tucker Carlson's audience that, hey, we got your guy Trump in, and globalism is actually good. You should just drink the Kool-Aid like Trump did, and everything's happy. And so it was actually really the opening of that interview is, in particular, even if you don't watch the whole thing, the opening is worth watching, because Tucker Carlson kind of goes into his upbringing and the right-wing ideology he grew up in his family and in school and university. He absolutely was raised to believe, in the whole, the Reagan ideology that, the Soviet Union is the biggest existential threat in the world. And once the Soviet Union is defeated, it's all going to be rainbows and puppies for everybody, right? It's going to be utopia. All we have to do is defeat the Soviet Union, and it's going to be, peace on earth, utopia. And it actually kind of made me respect Tucker Carlson more, especially because he's a Gen X guy. He's in his 50s. He's past the age where most people easily change their ideology. By that age, most people are pretty entrenched in what they believe. You guys you
sense that he's reassessing some things,
right? Because he's grown up in this very traditional conservative Reagan. Reagan's basically the next best thing since Jesus himself, almost literally. And you kind of say, and he's talking about, it's you go into American cities, he goes into Washington, D.C., and Carlo, I'm sure you see this. You go into Washington, D.C., and it's a hellhole. It's weird because there's these Roman style architecture, classical Roman architecture, and the rest of it is a freaking ghetto, literally. I've been there. It's a ghetto outside of those beautiful classic Greek Roman architecture, and it's just a ghetto.
And for those libertarians who have actually read Ayn Rand,
Mm-hmm.
the Roman columns should be causing people, true libertarians,
right.
to.
So basically, he was saying, and what was interesting about that is he was saying, it's and literally Tucker was Putin did not do anything to Washington D.C. Why are Americans on the street homeless? And he didn't say why are whites, why are my fellow white? He didn't say that. He said, Americans, because he sees black people, white people, or whoever, homeless on the street, addicted to drugs, because he mentioned that there's a huge, and it's not the fault, it's I know it's a popular libertarian position to say, oh, it's just personal choice. You made bad decisions. Tucker could kind of express it's a cultural and social problem.
It's the fault of China because of the,
What's interesting about Tucker, and also what I kind of noticed about him too, is he used to, if you look at Tucker Carlson shows when he was on Fox 5 years ago, he's super gung-ho on the whole anti-China crusade. But I think after,
he softened a bit,
especially after Ukraine, he was kind of I noticed he noticeably, I wouldn't say he likes China now, but he's noticeably realized, shit, I don't want a war with China. So it's really interesting to see Tucker kind of back off on his usual rhetoric on war with China, while Democrats you know, the people who say that Tucker's like this evil guy who's going to start World War III. Tucker's like, well, I don't like China, but I don't want to go to war with them either. You know, so I noticed that trend with him also.
Yeah, he should go visit Beijing.
Well, I'd like to soften a little bit what Ian said too. The Washington D.C. area is one of the wealthiest areas in the country, and parts of Washington, of course, parts of Washington are ghetto. There's thousands of homeless people, but there are wealthy parts of Washington. There's Fox Hall, and there's upper Northwest Washington, where a lot of the journalists live, and in Chevy Chase, Bethesda, which is actually in Maryland. There are wealthy.
Well, of course, it's like a third world. It's like a third world country. There's very rich areas, and
they somewhat deplorably call the African American wealthy section, which is 16th Street and streets radiating out from that. They call it the Gold Coast. It's kind of like a harkening back to the days of when North Africans were pirating European ships, the Barbary Coast. So
wait, this neighborhood is called the Gold Coast?
It's euphemistically called the Gold Coast.
Okay. The affluent African American neighborhood.
That's where they live,
in DC.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So Ian was talking about Tucker Carlson. I didn't see that entire interview with the senator, whatever his name was,
Ted Cruz, right?
Ted Cruz. I saw the interview where the German media guy, who I guess he's kind of higher up. He's kind of a higher up. He's upper executive with some big media outlet in Germany. But I thought there was a lot of utility in seeing these two perspectives go back and forth, and it was thoroughly entertaining. Listen to Tucker denounce Germany for its spinelessness, for its subservience to U.S. imperialism. But the problem is I still get frustrated because Tucker doesn't have, he misses so much, and his ideology is based on, returning to the Constitution, and it has nothing to do at all with class, because ultimately, Tucker is a member of the bourgeoisie, and his family is, and he represents the bourgeoisie. He represents the faction of the bourgeoisie that wants to, do things a little bit different, and is unhappy with the way that, the bourgeoisie has done things over the last several decades. And so he's got a different idea of how they should do things. And he talks about returning to the Constitution, and all that misses the reality that socialism is the ultimate, the way the cure. It's how we improve the system is not by putting another bourgeoisie faction in power and pursuing a particular strategy, but it's just putting the working class in power, and it's recognizing and articulating and embracing this paradigm where the working class has interests, political and economic, that are different than the interests of the ownership class. And until and unless you are open and are talking about that, you're not really engaging in reality. Now, you can have solid criticisms of the status quo, and for that I appreciate Tucker. There's a lot of utility in watching Tucker because he does have solid, scathing criticisms of the status quo, and he's a great person to talk about those. And it was great to watch him just belittle that German guy who was basically just your average promoter of the Ukraine war and Russia bad and all the establishment narratives that people are so disgusted with. And so it's good to see when they're soundly criticized.
Well, consider
I just have a problem with Tucker because he's definitely an anti-socialist. Tucker is a fucking anti-socialist, and his solutions aren't fucking solutions. That's where he gets it wrong. He doesn't have solutions. He's got more of the same, but that's my opinion.
Well, consider this vote, which was introduced by Majority Green to
Defund
shut
Israel.
down that. I think it was I
Iron
don't remember
Dome.
the exact figure, $500 million shipment to Israel. Almost everybody in Congress voted. There's only 6 votes in favor, and AOC, Alexandria, voted against it. And a lot of people were talking about the irony of MTG, who's kind of a kooky right-wing woman from the South, voting in favor of actually pushing this bill to cut off military aids to Israel. And AOC, the socialist liberal darling of America, voting in favor of it. And she even posted, AOC even posted on Twitter afterwards, and she was like, well, I voted against it because these are defensive weapons. Well, that's literally like saying we're not sending offensive weapons to Nazi Germany. We're only sending them defensive weapons. Well, it's the same freaking thing. It helps them the same way. It's such retarded logic.
It epitomizes the problem with democratic socialism. It's not real socialism. It's an imperial, it's a bourgeois, pretense of socialism.
Well, and even these characters like AOC, because you remember when AOC was elected to the Senate, the Congress, I guess. I forget what she is. Congress.
Sure she's a 2-term congressperson, I think.
Yeah, she's Congress, not senator. There's only 2 senators, but
2 years.
And people posted after she voted. It's like, well, and they kind of dug into it. It was Israeli venture capitalists who funded her campaign to begin with. And so the whole thing about she's this commie far left socialist was all an act. It was literally just marketing. And nothing to do with reality. She isn't far left. She isn't far anything. She's just a completely center right mainstream person who just says whatever her handlers tell her to say. And she gets that demographic. She gets that Brooklyn minority, Black and Hispanic vote. Like, oh, she's this far left person who speaks to the people and is just an act. She's just another establishment hack.
You're not going to find disagreement from actual Marxist-Leninists.
Mm-hmm.
She's a sheepdog, kind of like Bernie Sanders, trying to entice confused, leftist-minded people to vote Democrat. And for that, she's abominably evil, and she should be hanging from the lamppost just like all the rest of them.
And at the same time, I must say, strategically, tactically speaking, temporarily, we should support any, be they liberal, social democrats, like fake leftists, whatever, anyone who is rocking the boat even a little bit.
Which would be Marjorie Taylor Greene. We should be supporting MTG with this legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone who's causing a ruckus, which includes I had in mind this new dude from Uganda, this half Arab,
the mayor of New York. That guy.
Yeah, of New York. Yeah.
What's his name?
Mimani, something like that.
Something like that. I can't remember. Let's chalk it up to my medication.
Yeah, I'm all weed. Also, it's my
Mambani.
medication also. My medication is also fucking with my head. Anyway, we know who we're talking about.
Yes.
He's not a hope. He doesn't represent hope for New York City or the United States, but we should support him, I think, because he's riling things up and really driving the contradiction further, wider.
Yeah, I want him to do that. I'm just not sure he will, like in any real sense. So I think he might end up just kind of helping the Democrats to rebrand and to be more appealing to anti-establishment, leftist-minded people. That might be the ultimate result of his, and they might be preparing him for some kind of future, more important office. But, just the Democrats are good at that.
Stop supporting him.
What?
I assume when that happens, we stop supporting him.
Right. No. Yeah.
His platform was so Gilligan Island. It's like Gilligan's Island. It didn't have a prayer.
But you have,
platform.
one out of probably hundreds of thousands of mayors. He is one of the mayors of the biggest cities, and he does have a media spotlight. But really, like, what kind of power does he have? What kind of change can he actually do? So it's more just optics, and I think it's optics designed to, rebrand the Democratic Party and trying to entice people to look at the Democrats. But I do, definitely people oppose him, and so Zionists, in New York, the rich ones definitely were against him, and so for that, we got to support him. And he also did get a lot of I think he won the Jewish vote. Like, more Jews voted for him because a lot of Jews are appalled by, not enough, of course, but are some of them are appalled by what Israel's doing, and they hate Netanyahu and they hate the genocide, allegedly.
Well, I think a big thing we're seeing a lot right now is this purity test gatekeeping, and weirdly, I see it more in Europe than I see in the USA itself. It's weird to see all these people in Europe with these very opinionated, Facebook posts about what's going on in American politics. But I'll ask these European liberals, well, you're pro-Palestine and blah blah blah, so shit. Don't you think you should at least respect Tucker Carlson or Marjorie Green for saying the right things? And there's like, oh, well, no, because they're bad on these other issues, which is gatekeeping. It's pure gatekeeping. And the end result is that it's shooting yourself in the foot, because there's no consensus that this particular thing needs to stop or this particular thing needs to change. And I'll say that if I see a guy out there, throwing bricks through a window because of Palestine, or if I see someone, very advocating about Ukraine, I automatically respect that person. I don't care if I disagree with that person on every other issue. If I disagree with them about gun control, about abortion, about immigration, about every other, gay marriage, every other, social justice type issue. I don't care if I disagree with that person about every other thing out there. You're protesting the genocides that's killed 400,000 people in the past 2 years. So I don't agree I don't care if I disagree with you on literally everything else.
Really,
I'm on your side, for God's sake.
Okay, go ahead, Carlo.
I have a question that's somewhat relevant, and Ian can probably help us out here, because you saw the interview of Tucker Carlson, and the medication, once again. What was he was talking to Tucker Carlson, and the conversation, the senator he was talking to. I can't remember his name now.
Ted Cruz, the Cuban.
Cruz,
Yes.
Yeah, and Ted Cruz said that he ran for Congress
to support Israel.
Israel. How do you think that's going to play nowadays?
Well, like I said, I think that was pre-planned. I think Ted Cruz was supposed to go on that show and convince the disillusioned, because there are a lot of disillusioned MAGA people right now because Trump being a sellout. Because Trump is not a nationalist. I mean, there's a lot of things. He's clearly just kind of a right wing. If I'm saying that right, he's kind of a right wing alternative to Obama. He's doing some anti-immigration stuff. He's pushing some of those right-wing buttons, but for the most part, he's Obama. He's the establishment guy. He's going to war with Iran. He's going to war against Russia. And so Ted Cruz was on that show to get these pissed off right-wing MAGA people to say, oh, well, this is actually a good thing, to give that side of the story. I think it didn't work. It didn't work. I think a lot of people watch it like, what the fuck? You're a U.S. senator, and you're saying I entered politics to support Israel. What the fuck is that? You're not in the Israeli Senate. You're not a politician.
Yeah, and then his justification using the Bible that he doesn't even understand, and as if this Netanyahu government is the same Israel that God told Abraham.
And when it comes to nationalism and ethnicity, those sort of topics, I think it was a good illustration of this weird this weird perspective they push, because you remember that part. I'm sorry, some of you didn't say it, but there's one part of the conversation where basically Ted Cruz said, well, the Bible says we're supposed to support Israel, and Tucker Carlson is like, well, I mean, Israel was a state, of Hebrews, thousands of years ago. You're saying the modern government of Israel he's like, well, because so in the same breath, he's accusing Tucker Carlson of anti-Semitism against Jews, against the ethnicity. But at the same time saying we have to support Israel because it's the Jewish state from thousands of years ago, which of course is a contradiction. I mean, you can say it's legitimate. It's a legitimate argument to say we have to support this, the Jewish nation. But saying this political structure, this government, it's a separate thing. States and nations and ethnicities are separate things. And Ted Cruz was mixing them up as he pleased, while at the same time accusing Tucker Carlson of being anti-Semitic, because Tucker Carlson is saying, well, it's a government. It's not an ethnicity. It's not.
So wait, you're saying Ted Cruz was inconsistent and illogical?
Right? He's never done that before. Ted Cruz has never been inconsistent before.
So you were saying, making a point before that point that it brought something to mind. It just reminded me of Jimmy Dore, when Jimmy Dore was making the joke about those people that refused to work with Scott Ritter or something. And he was laughing at them, saying that their position was essentially, yeah, I want to stop nuclear war, but not if I have to work with those people. Bring on the nuclear war before I work with those people. It's like,
right.
We have to, people that are saying the right thing on a certain issue, we'll work with them on that issue for sure. And we can't just, denounce them because they're not totally ideologically in agreement with us on every other issue. That was your point. That was a good point. An hour and 41 minutes in, gentlemen. Any last words? Or I know my blood sugar's low. Carlo has a last word.
Just real quick. I felt that I should have pressed my conversation about the Dominican Republic a little more, and the baseball gloves being made out of empty milk cartons. First of all, the kids that are using those empty cartons probably could not have afforded the contents, and that's all been under the tutelage of the United States. In fact, the United States held a coup in the Dominican Republic with the only hope they had, and I believe it was back in the 80s, and they couped in very classic style Juan Bosch. So it's all that poverty you see in these countries is due to association with the West and the U.S. So makes China look good.
Absolutely. I'm glad we're ending on Dominican Republic, because the most exciting thing, unrelated to politics, is Dominican Republic new dembow music that's on fire right now. Reggaeton has been stagnant for quite a while, and the Dominican Republic is picking up the slack and upping the energy and the creativity. Anyway.
Okay.
So that's interesting. And I Carlo stimulated a thought on my, in my brain about our original discussion about what is capitalism and useful definitions of capitalism and non-useful definitions of capitalism. And if we have a useful definition of capitalism that describes capitalism as it has always existed and functions, Haiti and the Dominican Republic, the island of Hispaniola, are capitalist. That's what capitalism has got you. So we have people fleeing capitalism. We have people in Haiti fleeing capitalism. And I'm just reminded how useless it is to define and describe capitalism as this imaginary thing that isn't even conceptually possible, because, you can't have totally free markets. Markets must be regulated. Contracts have to be enforced. Basic laws have to be enforced. And so, to do that, you have to have a system of taxation and et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, it's just conceptually impossible to think that, under capitalism and in the age of nation states, that you can have a totally free market. And so it's a useless definition. and people should reject it in favor of a definition that's useful and constructive to understanding how to improve and how to progress. I'm so sorry to do that to people as the last word, but I hope.
Well, I mean, in a way, they're right. I mean, real capitalism, as they define it, has never been practiced because the market is dominated by a very few 0.1% of the population. That's why real capitalism, that in their ideals, in their fantasy, in their ideals, has never been practiced. I mean, so in a way, they're right. Anyway.
All right.
On that note, thank you guys. Thank you, Leo, for being our special guest. Carlo and Ian, we will see you guys on Friday. I plan to be broadcasting Friday. So thank you, everyone, for watching, and we will see you then.
All right.
Big up, big up.